The night London forgot itself began with rain, not the violent kind that lashes windows and floods the streets, but a thin, endless drizzle that wrapped Baker Street in a curtain of mist. The gas lamps outside 221B glowed weakly through the fog like dying stars. I had returned late from a medical call, exhausted and eager for sleep. Yet, the moment I entered our sitting room, I sensed something deeply wrong. Sherlock Holmes sat motionless beside the fire. No violin rested in his hands. No scattered chemical experiments cluttered the table. Even his pipe had gone cold beside the armchair. He simply stared into the flames. "Holmes?" I asked, quietly. For several seconds he did not answer. Then at last he spoke, his voice unusually low. "Watson, have you ever forgotten something important?" I removed my coat slowly. "I dare say everyone forgets things." "No," he murmured. "I mean truly forgotten. Something torn from the mind entirely." A chill touched the room despite the fire. Holmes reached into his dressing gown and withdrew a folded sheet of paper. "Read this." I unfolded it carefully. Across the page, written in dark, hurried ink, were only 4 words. "You should not remember." I frowned. "Who sent this?" Holmes looked up at me then, and I saw something I had rarely witnessed in all our years together. "Fear. That," he said softly, "is the troubling part." He rose abruptly and crossed to his old case journals, stacked upon the shelf. Pulling one free, he opened it upon the table before me. Most of the pages were filled with his usual sharp observations and precise notes. But near the center, 3 entire pages were blank. Holmes tilted them toward the firelight. Faint indentations scarred the paper, as though words had once been written there, and somehow erased. My throat tightened. What was here? Holmes gave a slow shake of his head. "I do not know." Before I could answer, 3 heavy knocks echoed from downstairs. Not hurried, not loud, slow, deliberate. Holmes stiffened instantly. Again came the knocking. The entire house seemed unnaturally silent afterward. Holmes reached quietly for his revolver. "Stay behind me, Watson." Together we descended the dark staircase toward the front door. The knocking had stopped. Holmes opened the door sharply and found no one there. Only swirling fog, but resting upon the doorstep lay a black leather notebook, soaked by rain. Holmes bent down slowly and picked it up. The moment his fingers touched the cover, his expression changed completely. "Oh, God," he whispered. Then, somewhere far beneath Baker Street, I thought I heard the distant sound of a train whistle. Holmes carried the black notebook upstairs as though it was something alive. The fire crackled softly in our sitting room, yet the warmth no longer reached me. Rain tapped against the windows, while fog pressed thickly against the glass outside Baker Street. Holmes placed the notebook carefully upon the table. It was old, far older than I first imagined. The leather cover was cracked with age, and on the spine was a strange symbol, a circle split by a single black line. "You recognize it?" I said. Holmes remained silent for a moment. "No," he murmured at last. "But part of me believes I should." That answer unsettled me more than I cared to admit. He opened the notebook slowly. The first several pages were blank. Then suddenly, near the center, words appeared pressed deep into the paper, as though carved by force, rather than written with ink. "Do not go below." A cold sensation crept down my spine. "Below what?" I asked quietly. Holmes turned another page. This time there was a map, not of streets above London, but tunnels beneath it. Narrow rail lines twisted through darkness beneath Baker Street Station, ending at a single marked location, old platform. Holmes immediately crossed the bookshelf and scattered old railway maps across the table with frantic precision. Within moments he found it, a forgotten underground line sealed decades earlier, after what officials called a tunnel collapse. Yet Holmes's expression told me he no longer believed that story. Before I could question him further, a violent pounding shook the front door downstairs. Not polite knocking. Someone was trying to force entry. Holmes seized his revolver instantly. The pounding stopped. Then a voice drifted upward through the silence, calm, cold. "Mr. Holmes, you were not meant to open the notebook." Every hair on my neck rose. Holmes motioned for silence and descended the stairs with me close behind. He threw open the front door. No one stood there. Only fog, rolling through Baker Street. Then behind us, Hudson gasped from the staircase. "The man," she whispered shakily. "He is already upstairs." Holmes sprinted back toward the sitting room. I followed close behind. The notebook was gone, and resting in Holmes's chair lay a fresh sheet of paper. 4 words, written in wet black ink. "You should have forgotten." Holmes did not sleep that night. The note remained upon the table between us, while the fire burned low and the fog thickened beyond the windows of Baker Street. "You should have forgotten." Those 4 words seemed to poison the room itself. Holmes paced restlessly, his sharp mind moving faster than ever. Yet I could see something troubling him deeply. Fear. Not fear of danger. Fear of memory. Near dawn, he suddenly stopped before the old railway maps, scattered across the table. "The tunnel," he murmured. "That is where this began." "You truly mean to go there?" I asked. Holmes gave a faint, humorless smile. "My dear Watson, someone broke into our rooms merely to recover that notebook. I think we may safely assume the answer lies underground." An hour later, we descended into Baker Street Station through an abandoned maintenance corridor thick with dust and rusted pipes. Holmes carried a lantern, while I kept one hand near my revolver. At the end of the passage stood an old iron gate, chained shut for decades. Yet scratched into the rusted metal was the same strange symbol from the notebook, the divided circle. Holmes examined the lock closely. "Recently opened," he whispered. Within moments he forced the gate apart. A rush of freezing air swept from the darkness below. The hidden tunnel stretched beneath London like the throat of some buried beast. Ancient rails vanished into blackness, while water dripped steadily from unseen pipes overhead. We had not gone far when Holmes suddenly extinguished the lantern. "What is it?" I whispered. "Listen." At first, I heard only distant dripping water. Then footsteps, slow, measured, approaching from deep within the tunnel. A pale electric light peered ahead, cutting through the darkness. A tall man stepped into view, wearing a dark overcoat soaked by rain. He stopped the moment he saw us. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the stranger sighed heavily. "So," he said quietly, "you truly remember?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" The man hesitated before reaching slowly into his coat. I raised my revolver instantly. But instead of a weapon, he withdrew the black notebook. "You were supposed to find this again," he murmured. Holmes stared at him coldly. "What is this place?" The stranger looked deeper into the tunnel behind him. "A graveyard," he whispered. "For whom?" I asked. His expression darkened. "For memories." Then somewhere far below us, deep beneath the rails, a train whistle echoed through the darkness. The train whistle echoed again. Beneath London, long, low, unnatural. The stranger's face drained of color as he clutched the black notebook tighter against his chest. "We should not be here," he whispered. Holmes stepped toward him immediately. "You know what lies below this tunnel." The man hesitated. "I know what waits." A sudden vibration rolled through the ancient rails beneath our feet. Dust drifted from the ceiling overhead, while somewhere deep in the darkness, metal groaned, like enormous machinery awakening after years of silence. Then came footsteps, heavy, slow, approaching from far below. Holmes lifted the lantern higher. At first, I saw nothing beyond the narrow reach of yellow light. Then a figure emerged from the blackness, tall, thin, draped in a long dark coat. Yet something about the way it moved turned my blood cold. Its limbs jerked strangely, as though the body itself struggled to remember how to walk. The stranger backed away instantly. "Do not let it touch you," he breathed. Holmes remained perfectly still. "Who are you?" he demanded. The figure stopped several yards away. For a moment, it said nothing. Then a fractured voice echoed through the tunnel, sounding as though several voices spoke together at once. "You remember too much." A chill swept over me. Holmes narrowed his eyes. "What is this place?" The figure tilted its head slowly. "A door. To what?" The answer came softly. "To forgotten things." The rails suddenly began trembling violently. A deafening roar exploded through the tunnel. Then two pale lights appeared deep below us, growing larger, faster. The stranger cried out, "Down!" Holmes seized my arm and pulled me hard against the wall as an ancient train thundered past us through the darkness. It was unlike any underground train I had ever seen. Black iron, broken windows, rust covering its sides like dried blood. Yet the most horrifying sight was inside. Passengers filled every carriage. Men, women, children, all sitting perfectly motionless beneath flickering lights. Every face blank, every pair of eyes staring forward lifelessly. Then one woman slowly turned her head toward me as the train streamed past. Her lips moved silently against the glass. "Help us remember." The train vanished into darkness. Silence followed. I could barely breathe. What in God's name was that? The stranger stared into the tunnel with hollow eyes. They were forgotten. Holmes's expression sharpened instantly. "You mean erased?" The figure in the dark coat stepped closer again. This time the lantern light touched its face, and I nearly recoiled. There were no features, no eyes, no mouth, only shifting darkness where a human face should have been. The thing pointed slowly deeper underground. "The platform is waiting." Holmes took the notebook from the trembling stranger. Then, very softly, he asked, "What happens if someone remembers?" The faceless figure did not answer Holmes immediately. It stood motionless upon the ancient rails, while water dripped steadily through the tunnel around us. The stranger beside me looked close to collapse, his eyes fixed upon the darkness below, as though expecting something terrible to emerge at any moment. Then the figure finally spoke. "If someone remembers," it whispered, "the archive remembers them in return." A deep, metallic groan echoed beneath our feet. The rails began blowing faintly. Holmes's expression sharpened. "The archive?" The stranger swallowed hard. "You must leave now." Instead, Holmes opened the black notebook. Most of its pages remained blank, but near the center, new words had appeared in fresh black ink. Holmes stared at the sentence without blinking. Then somewhere deep underground came the sound of synchronized footsteps. Not one pair, many, dozens, slowly approaching through the darkness beneath London. The stranger stepped backward immediately. "They are coming." Holmes shut the notebook calmly. "Who are they?" The answer arrived before the man could speak. Shapes emerged along the tunnel ahead. Tall figures in black coats walking in perfect unison. Their movements were unnaturally smooth, almost mechanical. And none of them possessed faces. I gripped my revolver tightly. The faceless figure nearest us pointed toward Holmes. He opened the door once before. My blood froze. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" The stranger looked horrified. "You do not remember." Holmes took a slow step forward. "Remember what?" Before anyone could answer, a violent roar exploded through the tunnel. The ancient train returned. Its pale lights cut through the darkness as it thundered toward us faster than before. Wind blasted through the passage, while the faceless figures stood perfectly still upon the rails. Again, I saw the passengers inside, motionless, silent, forgotten. But this time, several faces turned toward Holmes as the train passed. Every one of them mouthed the same words against the glass. "Come back." The train vanished into darkness. Holmes remained frozen. Something had changed in his expression. Recognition, pain, fragments of memory were returning. "I was here," he whispered. The stranger closed his eyes. "Yes." Holmes pressed a hand against his temple. "The platform," he murmured. "I found something beneath the station." The faceless figures moved closer together now, surrounding the tunnel entrance like silent guards. One raised a pale hand and pointed deeper underground. A faint golden light flickered far below. The stranger grabbed Holmes's arm desperately. "You cannot go there again." Holmes slowly lowered his hand from his forehead. Fear lingered in his eyes now, but so did something stronger, curiosity. "My dear Flo," he said quietly, "I fear I already did." Holmes walked toward the golden light, without another word. The stranger cursed softly under his breath and hurried after us, while the faceless figures remained motionless along the rails, watching in silence. The tunnel widened gradually, until at last we emerged into a vast underground station hidden beneath London. I stopped dead. Ancient iron pillars stretched upward into darkness beyond sight. Dust-covered benches lined the platform, while enormous clocks hung frozen upon the walls, each displaying a different hour. Yet the station was not abandoned. Hundreds of people stood waiting beneath the dim golden lamps. Men in old railway uniforms, women in faded Victorian dresses, children clutching suitcases. None of them moved. None of them spoke. They simply stared ahead with hollow, expressionless faces, like passengers trapped between moments in time. "Good Lord," I whispered. Holmes stepped slowly onto the platform, his sharp eyes studying the crowd. Then suddenly he froze beside an elderly man seated near the tracks. The man wore a rusted railway uniform with a tarnished nameplate still pinned to his coat. To my spell, Holmes looked sharply towards the stranger. This man disappeared. 1888. The stranger nodded grimly. He was one of the first taken. A cold weight settled in my chest. "You mean these people were erased?" Before the stranger could answer, the faceless figure from the tunnel approached silently behind us. "They were forgotten," it whispered. Holmes turned immediately. "What is this place?" The figure slowly pointed toward the darkness beyond the far end of the station. The archive. At the edge of the platform stood an enormous black tunnel, unlike the railway passages above. No rails continued through it, only darkness, and above the entrance, carved into the stone arch, were 4 words: "Nothing truly vanishes." Holmes stared at them intensely. Then suddenly he pressed a hand against the wall and staggered slightly. "Holmes!" His breathing quickened. "I remember this place," he whispered. The stranger's face filled with alarm. "No, not yet." Holmes ignored him. "I came here before," he murmured. "Years ago." The station lights flickered violently. The waiting passengers slowly turned their heads toward Holmes, all at once. Every pair of blank eyes fixed upon him. The faceless figure stepped closer. "You opened the archive once already." Holmes's expression darkened with dawning horror. "The missing pages in my journal. You chose to forget." A deep rumbling echoed from inside the black tunnel. Then came a sound that froze my blood completely. Pages turning, massive pages, slowly, somewhere deep within the darkness. The golden lights dimmed further, and then, from the tunnel itself, a voice emerged. Ancient, calm, endless. "Sherlock Holmes," it whispered. Every clock in the station suddenly began ticking again. The voice echoed through the underground station like distant thunder. "Sherlock Holmes." Every clock upon the walls began ticking at once. Some moved slowly, others spun wildly backward, while the forgotten passengers standing along the platform remained perfectly still beneath the flickering golden lamps. Beside me, the stranger whispered urgently, "Do not answer it." Holmes ignored him. His eyes remained fixed on the enormous black tunnel beyond the station, where the pale light pulsed softly in the darkness. "What are you?" Holmes called. For several moments only the sound of turning pages answered him. Massive pages, slowly shifting somewhere far below London. Then the voice returned. "I am Remembrance." A chill swept through me. The faceless figure near the rails lowered its head, as though bowing before something sacred. Holmes stepped closer to the tunnel. "No," he said quietly. "You are something else." The station trembled faintly. Passengers began turning their heads toward Holmes one by one, in perfect, unnatural unison. The stranger grabbed my sleeve tightly. "It knows, he remembers now." Holmes suddenly pressed a hand against his temple. Pain crossed his face. Fragments of memory were returning. "I have seen this place before," he whispered. "Years ago." The voice answered instantly. "And you poor Baton Diptor." A deep rumbling echoed through the station floor. Dust drifted from the ceiling overhead, while the clocks spun faster and faster. Holmes staggered another step forward. "I saw shells," he murmured. "Thousands of names." The faceless figure slowly raised one pale hand towards the darkness. "All forgotten things belong to the archive." Then the pale light inside the tunnel began changing shape. At first it resembled smoke. Then slowly it formed into a man standing within the golden glow, tall, thin, wearing Holmes's own coat. I stared in horror. The thing had taken Holmes' appearance perfectly. Even his voice. "You returned willingly," the duplicate said calmly. The stranger backed away in terror. "It is reading his memories." Holmes stared at his own reflection inside the tunnel. "And Henry Acton?" he demanded. The duplicate smiled faintly. "He remembered too much." The clocks stopped instantly. Complete silence crashed across the station. Then the duplicate raised one pale hand towards Holmes. "You were forgotten once before, Sherlock Holmes." Holmes's expression changed completely. Fear, recognition, memory. "The Reichenbach Falls," he whispered, and the duplicate smiled wider. "That," it said softly, "is where we first met." Holmes stood frozen at the edge of the platform. "The Reichenbach Falls," he whispered again. The duplicate version of himself smiled faintly within the golden light. "That is where you first entered the archive." The station trembled beneath us. Around the platform, forgotten passengers began whispering louder now. Hundreds of voices overlapped together in fragments of memories and names, filling the underground chamber with a terrible, restless sound. Beside me, the stranger shook his head desperately. "It is trying to put him back." Holmes ignored him. "You saved me, it falls," he said to the creature. "No," the duplicate replied calmly. "We preserved you." A cold silence followed. Then Holmes's expression changed. I knew that look well. He had seen through something. "You feed on memory," Holmes murmured. "That is why forgotten people remain here." The golden figure flickered. The duplicate's smile faded slightly. "They surrender themselves willingly." Holmes took another step forward. "No," he said sharply. "They surrender pain, grief, fear. You offer escape through forgetting." The station lights dimmed violently. The passengers twitched unnaturally, as though the words themselves disturbed the archive. The stranger stared at Holmes in disbelief. "You understand it?" Holmes's eyes remained fixed upon the duplicate. "At Reichenbach," he whispered, "I wanted to despair. The world believed me dead. That gave this thing power over me." The duplicate Holmes tilted its head slowly. "You chose silence, and Henry Acton refused it." For the first time, the creature showed anger. The golden light pulsed sharply. He remembered too much. Holmes suddenly seized the black notebook from his coat and flicked through its pages rapidly. Fresh words were appearing by themselves in dark, spreading ink. Holmes smiled coldly. "There it is." The stranger stepped closer. "What does it mean?" "It cannot erase a person completely, lest they surrender their own identity." The duplicate moved toward Holmes instantly. "You should stop reading." But Holmes had already understood. He turned sharply toward the motionless passengers lining the station. "These people were not merely taken," he shouted. "They were convinced to forget themselves." The whistles around the platform grew louder. Several passengers blinked suddenly, though awakening from a dream. The duplicate's form flickered violently. Holmes pointed directly at it. "That is why Henry Acton frightened you." He remembered his own name. The station shook hard enough to crack the stone beneath our feet. The golden light surged upward. The faceless figures along the rails stepped forward together. The stranger grabbed my arm. "We have to leave now." But Holmes remained perfectly calm. "My dear Watson," he said softly, "I believe we have finally found its weakness." He tore a page from the notebook. The duplicate recoiled instantly. No, Holmes held the page over the rails. "If memory feeds this thing," he said quietly, "then remembrance can destroy it." The clocks throughout the station began spinning backward at impossible speed. The passengers started screaming. Not in fear, in awakening. Names echoed across the platform. Real names, forgotten names, and somewhere, deep beneath London, something enormous roared in anger. The underground station descended into chaos. The moment Holmes tore the page from the notebook, every clock upon the walls began spinning backward at impossible speed. The golden lamps flickered violently, while the forgotten passengers clutched their heads as memories flooded back into them all at once. Names echoed through the station. Real names, forgotten names. The duplicate version of Holmes staggered backward, its body flickering wildly between dozens of shifting faces. "You should not have done that," it hissed. Holmes stood firm at the edge of the rails, the torn page clenched tightly in his hand. "My dear fellow," he said coldly, "I believe your archive is failing." A deafening roar thundered beneath London. The station floor cracked violently. Massive fractures split the rails apart, while blinding white light burst upward from somewhere deep below the platform. Then I saw it, not clearly. No human mind could truly understand its shape, only fragments, endless pages turning in darkness. Thousands upon thousands of names, flowing across enormous surfaces, like rivers of black ink, and between them, eyes, watching, remembering. The stranger fell to his knees in terror. "It is waking up!" The duplicate pointed furiously toward Holmes. "You belong to the archive." Holmes's expression hardened instantly. "No," he replied. "I escaped it." The station shook harder. Passengers screamed as sections of ceiling collapsed around us. Stone and dust crashed onto the platform, while several faceless figures near the rails dissolved into drifting black ash. For the first time, fear appeared in the duplicate's eyes. Holmes noticed immediately. "That is it, is not it?" he said sharply. "The archive survives only while people choose to forget." The golden light pulsed violently. At once, the forgotten passengers began remembering faster. Some cried openly, others shouted their own names through the collapsing station. The duplicate staggered again, its body unraveling into streams of ink and fluttering paper fragments. "You cannot destroy remembrance," it whispered. Holmes glanced toward the gigantic iron control wheel beside the shattered tracks. Ancient machinery connected to the hidden tunnels beneath London. Then he smiled. "I do not intend to destroy it," he said softly. "Only bury it." The stranger looked horrified. "If you collapse the station, it seals the archive again." Another tremendous roar exploded beneath us. Something enormous surged upward below the rails. The clocks shattered. All at once, Holmes seized the iron wheel with both hands. Immediately, the duplicate screamed, "Stop him!" The remaining faceless figures rushed toward us through the falling dust and stone. I fired instinctively. One dissolved instantly into black smoke. Another collapsed into drifting scraps of paper across the platform floor. Holmes strained against the wheel as colossal gears groaned somewhere deep underground. The entire station trembled. Passengers fled towards the stairwell, while the golden light pulsed wildly beneath the broken rails. Then the duplicate looked directly at Holmes one final time, and quietly it said, "You will be forgotten again." Holmes paused only briefly. Then he forced the wheel downward harder. "Perhaps," he replied calmly, "but not tonight." Holmes forced the iron wheel downward with all his strength. Deep beneath the station, enormous gears roared awake. The underground platform shook violently as cracks split across the rails and stone rained from the ceiling. The archive screamed, not with one voice, with thousands. Passengers fled toward the stairwell, while the faceless figures dissolved into black ash around us. Yet the duplicate Holmes staggered through the golden light, its body unraveling into streams of ink and paper. "You cannot bury remembrance," it hissed. Holmes's eyes remained cold. "No," he replied, "but I can bury you." Suddenly, the creature lunged forward and seized Holmes's wrist. At once, his expression changed. Confusion flooded his face. The wheel slipped in his grasp. The archive was taking his memories again. You were happier forgotten, the duplicate whispered. Holmes, I shouted. For one terrible moment, he looked at me without recognition. Then I saw the black notebook lying near the shattered rails. Its pages fluttered wildly, and across the final sheet appeared 4 fresh words in dark ink. Remember who you are. I snatched up the notebook instantly. Sherlock Holmes, I shouted above the chaos. You are the greatest detective in England. The creature recoiled sharply. Recognition returned to Holmes's eyes. With sudden fury, he shoved the duplicate backward and forced the iron wheel down completely. Deep underground, colossal locks slammed shut. The golden light vanished. The archive roared one final time before the black tunnel sealed behind falling iron barriers and collapsing stone. "Run!" Holmes shouted. We sprinted through the crumbling station and burst onto Baker Street moments before dawn. Hours later, back at 221B, Holmes silently tossed the black notebook into the fire. As the pages curled into ash, he looked toward me thoughtfully. "Watson," he murmured, "have you ever felt that something important has been forgotten?" And somewhere far beneath London, I thought I heard a distant train whistle echo through the dark.